And as you go through the programming, like you just did, and talk about it, it's anchored in an experience and it's anchored in a specific interest, whether it be fishing, hunting, or photography. But that's just the very specific way into a more generalized life path moving forward. As the board tasked you with having a quote bigger impact, what was the work done to build out that program that you talked about, to move from an experience-based experience to an experience-based equipping of life skills moving forward?
Yeah, like I said, there was a bunch of research diving into the science, so we understood what we needed to do in order to deliver those kind of impacts. It was based on a lot of experiential learning because, like I said, I understood what nature did for me. I didn't understand why until I started diving into the research. And then it was, I was a retired Marine. I ran it like I ran the Marine Corps planning process, and I had all those conversations with board directors to kind of frame the problem. And then I brought this incredible team that I have together, and we went through about a 6-month process where we started with the end in mind, understood the outcomes that we were trying to achieve. There were some first principles that we said we would adhere to. First, do no harm to our warriors. Second, we're going to serve veterans through nature. Third, it's going to be based on science and data. And fourth, that it's going to have to be a long-term program because the kind of change we're trying to make doesn't happen in a short amount of time.
Is that much of it? That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Carey. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post 9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists, and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills. Episode 118 features Brian Gilman, a Marine Corps veteran and the CEO of Warriors in Quiet Waters. His background uniquely qualifies him to evolve Warrior in Quiet Waters' impact. It starts with his generational roots in Butte, Montana, a hard rock mining town chiseled into the mountains by a relentless work ethic. An avid outdoorsman, devoted husband, and proud father, Brian finds peace in the solace of nature, meaning in his wife and 2 sons, and purpose in equipping fellow veterans to discover their own peace, meaning, and purpose. Welcome. This is Veteran Made. This episode is brought to you by Go Pills, a nootropic that gives your brain neurotransmitter support both acutely and over time. Those of us that served in the military, regardless of where we served and in what capacity we served, all came into contact with different chemicals, different percussions, and various elements of our environments that have affected our brain's ability to function. Think about your brain's performance and your mental health right now, yes, but think about your future too. We have so much more control over our long-term health than we realize. Visit gopills.com and use code VM15 at checkout for 15% off. That's VM15 for 15% off. Give your brain the neurotransmitter support it needs to perform well right now and over time.
All right. We are live. Good afternoon from the great state of Ohio, and good morning from the great state of Montana. Brian Gilman, welcome to Veteran Made.
Thank you, Carey. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Thanks. It's an honor to have you. We were just discussing offline some mutual friends, John Daly, last week. So you're following him up, which is great. Worth Parker, who's a good friend and a multi-time guest here on Veteran Made. Yeah. So I love. I've grown to love my Marines. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
I love those Marines too, and now I'm a little scared if I'm following John Daly. So
no, it's going to be
setting the bar high.
Yeah, I love it. So if you could just give us a brief primer on who you are and where and when you served, and the organization you're leading now, and we'll jump into some questions.
Sounds great. I'm Brian Gilman. I'm the CEO of Warriors in Quiet Waters Foundation in Bozeman, Montana. I'm a Montana native, grew up in Butte, Montana, and joined the Marine Corps right after college with the intent to serve 4 years in the Corps, come back to Montana, and never leave it again. I finally came back 27 years later. So found out that the Marine Corps was what I was meant to do, and I was average at it. So I was able to stick around for a fairly long career, and was in what I thought was my second to last posting in the Marine Corps when the opportunity to join Warriors in Quiet Waters came up. So I retired about 3 years earlier than I planned because of this opportunity. I knew that I wanted to work in a nonprofit serving veterans when I retired from the Marine Corps, and Warriors in Quiet Waters filled that need. Not only a great veteran services organization that serves post 9/11 combat veterans, but in my home state and in the town my mother lives in. So it was a pretty easy decision to make.
I love it. I always love asking the question when I get senior folks such as yourself on the show, what your experience was like transitioning out of the military. And so two questions. One, what made you decide to stay in a little bit longer than your initial plan? And then when the opportunity to take this gig, or the gig that led to this gig, came about, what was that process like for you?
The reason that I stayed in the Marine Corps as long as I did was because I found purpose in being a Marine. It filled my cup. It gave me meaning. It gave me purpose. And like I said, I was an average Marine that, I was pretty good at it. And the Marine Corps kept providing opportunities that I couldn't pass up. I mean, once I finished my time as a platoon commander, I had the opportunity to be a formal school instructor. That sounded really, really interesting. Then I had the opportunity to be a company commander, then an operations officer for a battalion. And those opportunities just kept coming. So once 9/11 happened, like most of my peers, I was in it to win it. And ultimately ended up staying for 27 years. I had a unique opportunity when I was a lieutenant colonel assigned to the Joint Staff to serve veterans who were transitioning out of the military at the time. It was I thought I was checking into the J3 directorate, the operations directorate on the Joint Staff. And when I checked in at the Pentagon, I was told that I wasn't going to the J3. I was going to a place called the Chairman's Office of Reintegration. The Air Force Chief Warrant Officer who was telling me this at the personnel desk told me that I asked him what it was, and he said, "I don't know, but here's your boss's number. Give him a call." And the boss's name was a guy by the name of Jim Eisenhower, Colonel Jim Eisenhower, United States Army. And I called him, and he told me that the Chairman's Office of Reintegration was an office that Admiral Mullen had created in his office of the chairman to lead the military efforts to create effective reintegration pathways for our transitioning service members. And I ended up spending 3 years in that job, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Fell in love with the purpose that it gave me. Fell in love with the idea of working in nonprofits, because I bumped up against probably 400 nonprofits in those 3 years, and knew that was the work that I wanted to do when I got out. So, my transition out of the service because of this opportunity was pretty seamless, and probably pretty unique. I don't think many transitioning service members fall into an opportunity that checks all their boxes like this did for me. In the geographic location that they wanted to live. A job that not only provides financial security for my family and I, but also fills me with immense purpose and meaning. And that was baked into this opportunity for me. So I think that's a challenge that many veterans face. You may find a job. You're probably going to find a job, and you're probably going to be able to earn the money that you need to be financially stable. But is that job filling you with meaning? Is it filling you with a purpose? Is it filling you with that sense of community that you had in the military? And I know from all of the research that I've read and from the thousands of veterans that I've talked to, that's a huge gap that so many veterans are trying to fill when they leave the military. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I want to get there. But before we do, what was the status of that office at the time that you were assigned there, and what did you do for those 3 years, and what did you learn?
Yeah, the status of the office at the time was it was on its second chairmanship. So Admiral Mullen stood the office up. I joined the office when General Dempsey was the chairman, so it was on its second chairmanship. And I will tell you that it was an office of high stature. I mean, we were speaking on behalf of General Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So we were able to serve as conveners. We could get into just about any room that we wanted to. And really what we tried to do is we tried to connect all of the efforts that were happening in the veteran reintegration space together, spur collaboration, spur resources towards them, and be a convener to get people to talk about the way ahead. So the office had great stature, and I firmly believe we made a big difference. If you talk to a lot of the folks that were in the nonprofit space at the time, they'll tell you the same thing. the office, when General Dunford became the chairman, the office, I believe, survived for about another 2 years, and General Dunford had to make the hard decision to close the office, I believe. So.
So when did the Warriors in Quiet Waters opportunity come up for you, and can paint us a picture of what you were doing, what that looked like, what the role
Yeah.
was, and
Yeah.
your personal transition process as you evaluated this next opportunity?
Yes, sure. So I was post Colonel Command. I had completed my command at the Marine Raider Training Center about a year before, and I was serving as the Chief of Staff at Marine Special Operations Command. So, a pretty high intensity job, huge workload. Generals relying on you to ensure that his agenda is moving forward. And I found out about the opportunity at Warriors in Quiet Waters in December about October of 2019, and had found out about it through a family member who lives here in Bozeman who'd saw it, reached out to me and told me about it. And I just happened to know a former chairman of the board of Warriors in Quiet Waters that I'd met through this family member about 5 years prior. So I reached out to Joe Esparza, who was the former board chair, told him I saw that they were looking for a new executive director, and asked him if he thought I'd be a good fit, and he thought I'd be a great fit for it. With that knowledge, I went home and I talked to my wife and told her about the opportunity. And like I said, it was checking all the boxes we were looking for post retirement. And it was literally about a 5-minute conversation with my wife. We made the decision that this is the right thing for us. Right now, we'd done everything that we wanted to do in the Marine Corps. My plan was to complete my tour as the MARSOC Chief of Staff, take another move, and then use that last 3 years to my 30-year mark to get ready to transition. And then this opportunity came up. We knew it was the right thing, and so I applied, put my name in the hat, and through a series of about 4 interviews over the next 2 months, I was lucky enough to be the guy they selected. So that put me on a really quick transition. Typical transition, when it looks really good, you're looking at like an 18-month period when folks are starting the process. I accepted the job in January 2020. I stepped down as the Chief of Staff in May of 2020 and arrived here in Bozeman on June of 2020. So I got out of the Marine Corps in about 4.5 months. Really accelerated transition timeline. And like I said, for me, because it checked all those boxes, it felt pretty seamless. I mean, the biggest challenge was, transitioning from, being a leader in a military environment to being a leader in a civilian organization. And I've learned a ton of lessons along the way. Was well equipped by the Marine Corps to do this role, and I've taken all the things that I learned in the Marine Corps about being a leader to the role. It's just a matter of applying it a little bit differently in this environment. So, it was, like I said, it was a pretty smooth transition for me.
Do you feel like that accelerated timeline was a benefit for you personally and professionally? And do you think that scales? Do you think having a faster transition timeline would be more beneficial for service members?
I think it all depends on whether or not they're ready. Whether or not they're ready to make that leap, and it really depends on how well everything comes together for them. I mean, for many, it takes 18 months to do a lot of figuring out, what is it that I want to do? Where am I going to find purpose when I get out of the military? So I think it really depends. I think an 18-month timeline for the average transitioning service member is probably a pretty good timeline. I think that we could do it a lot better, but it takes time. I mean, it takes time to get all your medical in order. It takes time to figure everything out that you need to figure out to have an effective transition. And I think your transition continues well beyond after you end up in that first location, end up in that first job. That transition continues for years, I believe. So it definitely has for my family and I. The community that my family grew up in and lived in for two decades plus is a lot different than what we have now. And it's taken, for example, my wife a couple of years to rebuild that community here in Bozeman. That was baked into every move that we made. That family, that unit, that community is the families in the unit you're in. The kids are, they have high affinity with the other kids on base because they're all in the same boat. And it's just different out here. So it took my family and I probably another good 2 years before we really felt like we were transitioned because of, those intangible factors like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's become a bit of a through line on the podcast, and that's been driven by my own experiences. I enlisted in October of 2006, so that was what, 18 years ago, if I'm doing the math right.
Yeah, math
So
in public's dangerous, but that sounds right.
yeah, something like that, right? And so I've been out for roughly 15 years, and I've discovered over the course of the last 15 years, and I was just an enlisted airman for 4 years, right? It has been
Hmm.
it's an ongoing transition, right?
Yep.
And I just got back from a patrol base abate, returned to base with the book club, and I mean, things came up, and I was writing about things and thinking about things and conversing about things that I hadn't in years, and realizing that even now, not in a not in like a war bad make me sad kind of way, but just in a, oh wow, there are lots of things that I didn't realize I'm still working through to
Hmm.
learn how to reintegrate into society and into culture, into corporate America, right, into the workforce, and then
Yep.
reintegrating as a whole person. Not even on the emotional side, although there are obviously aspects of that, but I just mean more of that, like, kind of like brick and mortar, like,
Hmm.
it's an ongoing transition. This experience that we had, whether it was for 25, 20 plus years, like, that's a foundation for a life. And most of it is good, right? Like, most of it are like this reintegration process, the ongoing one, has been really, really good because I'm able to go back to that experience, that foundation, and pull from it things that I'm still able to use in my work life and my personal life, with friends, family, and colleagues.
Yeah, and that transition isn't the last transition you'll go through. This transition wasn't the last one I'll go through. The fact is that things will happen that will change our lives, and that's a transition that we're going to have to go through. Whether it's a family member dying, I'm not going to be the CEO of Warriors and Quiet Waters forever. That's going to change at some point. That's another transition. Life's about transition, and it's about building the capacity and the strengths and the knowledge and how to do that well. So.
Yeah, that's right. So what was the role that you applied for and initially got? Was it the CEO role?
Yeah, it wasn't called CEO at that time. It was executive director. Subsequently changed the title about 2.5 years ago, but it was the executive director. So the senior executive on the staff that reports to the board of directors and is responsible for everything that the organization does or fails to do to the board.
And so what was that professional transition like for you as you took on the role? What was the state of the organization at the time? How did you approach onboarding? How did you approach
Yeah,
onboarding to the existing organization that was doing work, and you were filling a
yeah.
role?
So the state of the organization was, it was a stable organization with an incredible reputation, a great work, and great outcomes for its veterans, that recognized that the needs of the veterans that were coming through the program had changed since it was founded in 2007, and that the organization needed to change with it to have a bigger impact on our participants and to attain the full potential of the organization. It had a board at the time. The board of directors you know, was had a vigorous vision to increase the impact of the organization, and that was really their charge to me when I came aboard. We have an organization with immense potential, and we know we can increase the impact that our programs have on post 9/11 combat veterans, and that's your job. The way I approached it was, similar to in 27 years in the Marine Corps, I think I counted it. I had 15 different jobs over that course. So I was moving about every 2.5 years to a new job. And I approached it the same way. I mean, I spent a lot of time in my first 90 days really looking around, asking a lot of questions, trying to get my sense of the organization. And there was a lot I had to learn. Believe it or not, there's a big difference between being in a military unit and being in a nonprofit organization. One of the first things that I did when I got here was I sat down with every individual director on the board and, had an interview with them, asked them a bunch of questions, asked them about their concerns. What are the sacred cows? What do you mean what does it mean to you when you say maximize the impact of the organization? Spent a lot of time trying to get to know the team that I had inherited, identifying the strengths and the weaknesses on the team, and really, developing a vision that team and that board of directors could get behind, in terms of where we were going to go to achieve the board's directive to me. And then, like I said, I had a lot to learn. I mean, in the Marine Corps, I managed budgets, I did all that stuff, but the fact is that, nonprofit management was a new thing to me. I had a lot to learn about fundraising, had a lot to learn about stakeholder engagement, I'd had some training in my MBA program on finances and things like that, but really applying it in the nonprofit world, there was a ton I had to learn. And I recognized that I didn't have all the answers, and that was okay. I had a great team around me that could help find the right answer. So that's what it looked like. I mean, it was a lot of learning, a lot of listening, and then really developing a vision for our future.
I had an experience at my one and only duty station in the Air Force. In between deployments, we had a turnover for our flight chiefs, and our new flight chief that was coming in post deployment, and that we were going to then deploy with 6 or so months later, he came in, and for the first 3 months, he stood at the back of formation, never said a word. I watched him have conversations with leadership. And then I watched him have conversations with other crew members, both in our career field and others on the flight line. Obviously, engaged in a couple of those conversations myself. And so then he officially took over. We're getting ready to deploy, and I asked him. I said, Sergeant Tensing, how come you spent so much time not actually saying anything when you first got here? And he said, well, how could I come into an organization that I don't have any experience with? He came from another airframe, right? We're loading fighters, bombers, and he was like, how can I have any impact on an organization if I don't know enough about it first and get to know the people and the processes, and then implement the things that I want to implement, or keep the things going that are going well?
Yeah. I mean, so the one thing I failed to mention was my transition here was right in the middle of COVID as well. So when I arrived, there was the state of Montana was still on a lockdown. The organization wasn't able to do any in-person programming, so they had shifted to a virtual model of programming. Those restrictions lifted about 3 weeks after I arrived at Waters and Quiet Waters, and the first big decision I made was we're going to get out fishing again now. So we totally scrubbed our list of participants that had been on the slate to come, and we started finding veterans that could benefit from the program that were within driving distance, because we had concerns about people getting on flights, and really figuring out how we could do in-person programming in a manner that was safe and effective, given the ongoing challenges of COVID. So pretty proud of the fact that, about 3 weeks after the restrictions in Montana lifted, we had people here in the program out in nature, receiving the benefits from nature. But in terms of making, pursuing that vision that I talked about, it was probably early 2021 before we really started making any big changes. So I'd been here for almost 7 months before I believed that I'd earned the trust of the board, the trust of the staff, to to state a vision that they could get behind, and start doing the hard work that was required to really lead change. So
paint us a picture of what your vision was at the time there in early 2021, and what were some of those big changes you made and why?
Yeah. So when I arrived in from 2007 until 2020, the programming that we provided was exactly what was needed when the foundation was established in 2007. Our participants were coming right out of military hospitals at that time. Many of them still had PICC lines in, they still had bandages on their wounds, they still had military chow hall food in their guts, and what they needed respite from that environment, the challenges of their wounds. They needed to get connected to other warriors who were going through similar things, getting connected to civilians who cared deeply about them, get them immersed in nature because of the incredible benefits that we receive from nature, physically and psychologically. And then we provided them a skill by teaching them how to fly fish and fully equipping them with all the equipment that they needed, so that once they returned home, they could continue to go back to that, and receive those benefits. And that model served the exact outcomes that the foundation built it for. But like I said, by about 2019, the board recognized that those needs had changed. They knew we could achieve a bigger impact. But that was about as far as it went, and they really relied on me to develop the vision. And I had come out of my time on the Joint Staff with one of the things that I really walked away from talking to all the veterans that I talked to in those 3 years, all of the nonprofits that I'd worked with, was a significant challenge that every veteran faces when they leave the military is this challenge of loss. A loss of identity, a loss of purpose, and a loss of community. So I knew that our program even though it was a nature-based program, we could deliver those outcomes. I just didn't know how at the time. I'm a lifelong I'm a Montana native, a lifelong outdoorsman. Eric started this organization to be based in fly fishing because when he came home from Vietnam, he went to the water with a fly rod and found healing and meaning through fly fishing. For me personally, when I came home from my combat deployments, it was here in Montana, in the mountains in Montana, with a bow in my hand, chasing archery elk, where I made meaning of my experiences. I found my new purpose, and I knew that we could use nature and these activities in nature that are so meaningful and impactful and awe-inspiring to empower veterans to find that path forward as well. So I knew it was based around purpose, identity, and community. And then we jumped into the research. There's been an immense amount of research since the early 1960s on mental well-being and what human beings need to thrive. And what we did was we took the most empirically rigorous model of human well-being and thriving that exists today, and we built a program around it. And we call it the pillars of a thriving life. But in order for any human being to thrive, in order for veterans to thrive after they leave the military, they have to have strength in what we call these pillars of a thriving life. They have to have a strong sense of security. And there's a whole bunch of stuff involved with that in terms of basic needs that need to be fulfilled. They need to have a strong sense of identity. They need to know who they are and what they stand for, even though they're no longer on active duty. They need to know what their core values are, because that really drives how they behave, the actions that they take, the decisions that they make. They need community. The number one driver of longevity and thriving in life is not our heart health. It's not our nutrition. It's not how much we PT. It's not whether we smoke or not. It's the quality and strengths of the relationships in our lives. They need to understand what their potential is as a veteran and how to actualize that full potential. And they need a sense of purpose. They need a life that brings them purpose and meaning. And that's what we built this program around. The program's called Built for More, and it's intentionally named because we know that veterans made such a huge difference while they're on active duty, but their transition out of uniform wasn't an end to that. They were built to do more. They're built for more. So over the course of about 2 years, we formed this vision and built a program framework to deliver on those outcomes based in nature. So the program is bookended by week-long immersions in nature on the front end and on the back end. It's about a 9-month-long program. And we immerse them in nature at their initial experience here in Montana to gain those benefits in nature. And I can talk about that if we want to get to that later. Teach them how to fly, fish, archery, hunt, or do photography. And then we start them on what we call a guided discovery process. So that's the program that we've built that helps them build strength in these pillars of a thriving life. And when they're here in Montana for that first week, that happens in the form of some guided discussions that happen every day that are led by my program facilitators that are designed to do a couple things. Number one, help them to understand that they're in a cohort of like-minded veterans that are going to have their back and gain their commitment, earn their trust, and illuminate the opportunity that the rest of the program has for them so that we can garner their commitment to do the hard work that's going to be required through the rest of the program. That first week, they're mostly fly fishing or getting ready for an archery elk hunt or learning how to do photography. But every day, there's a portion of the day that's broken out for that. So they spend a week here with that cohort, a cohort of 6 other veterans, so 7 veterans in the cohort. And then they return to their homes, and we deliver about 8 months of programming remotely. They stay together as a cohort as they go through this program. There's individual learning that they do online. There's online activities that they do. They do peer-to-peer discussions within the cohort. They do a whole bunch of journaling. They continue with the mindfulness, the nutrition practices, the movement practices that they were introduced when they were here in Montana. And every module is completed with a cohort-wide facilitated discussion around what that module's centered on. And it takes them about 8 months to get through that. And then they return back to Montana, or one of the other locations that we do programming based on the weather and the environment. And they really put into context everything that they've learned while they're here for that final week. And we've seen incredible outcomes. We measure what we do. The Institute for Veterans and Military Families does all of our impact evaluation. They collect data on our participants before they enter the program, throughout the program, at the end of the program and then annually thereafter. And we've seen some significant outcomes. We've doubled our participants' sense of purpose. We've quadrupled their sense of thriving. We've quadrupled their resilience against stress and anxiety. We've made them 3 times more effective in solving the problems that come their way. And they're sleeping about 3 times better after going through the Built for More program. And they have, most importantly, they understand how important community is, and they have a vision of what a purposeful life looks like for them going forward.
One of the difficult challenges facing nonprofits in our space is the line between providing an experience and providing a foundation for skills, sometimes treatment like for life after, right? You and I've talked a little bit about offline and things I talk quite a bit about with other nonprofit leaders in the space. And as you go through the programming, like you just did, and talk about it, it's anchored in an experience and it's anchored in a specific interest, whether it be fishing, hunting, or photography. But that's just the very specific way into a more generalized life path, moving forward. As the board tasked you with having a quote bigger impact, what was the work done to build out that program that you talked about, to move from an experience-based experience to an experience-based equipping of life skills moving forward?
Yeah, like I said, there was a bunch of research diving into the science, so we understood, what we needed to do in order to deliver those kind of impacts. It was based on a lot of experiential learning because, like I said, I understood what nature did for me. I didn't understand why until I started diving into the research. And then it was, I was a retired Marine. I ran it like I ran the Marine Corps planning process, and I had all those conversations with board directors to kind of frame the problem. And then I brought this incredible team that I have together, and we went through about a 6-month process where I started with the end in mind, understood the outcomes that we were trying to achieve. There were some first principles that we said we would adhere to. First, do no harm to our warriors. Second, we're going to serve veterans through nature. Third, it's going to be based on science and data. And fourth, that it's going to have to be a long-term program because the kind of change we're trying to make doesn't happen in a short amount of time. And then we developed about 4 different potential models that we could do it. We knew that there were challenges that we'd have to face. Is that, it's got to be a long-term program to achieve this change, but most veterans can't come and spend that amount of time in Montana. There's probably a low likelihood that all veterans are going to be able to come to Montana twice in the same year. So that kind of helped us design the framework. And then from there, once we had that framework built, it was a matter of taking what we learned with that science and building programs based on that science, the program itself, in a way that was non-clinical, that didn't make veterans, feel like it was a clinical program, but would help them through their own self-work, build strength in these pillars, and then come back to nature at the end. That first week that they come here is all about getting in nature. It's really all about building trust and building commitment in the program, and then carrying that commitment through, because it's work. It's not easy. It's not an easy program. But making these kind of positive changes in your life is not easy. So it was about a 1.5-year process from start to beginning, or start to end, and really was anchored in science and some detailed planning and a lot of discussions, and then discovery learning the first year that we ran the program. Built for More this year doesn't look like it was last year because we learned a lot of lessons. So, I took what I learned in the Marine Corps and was able to apply that to the problem that I had here.
Yeah, I think that's that framework can obviously be specific to a service or an MOS. Also something that can be generalized for everybody who's coming out of service, right? Like I use my Flightline frameworks still to this day as I work in advertising, marketing, and production, right? Like I try to see the flight line and understand how to get the birds in the air with the munitions on them, right? And that translates to producing an ad campaign or producing a film or whatever it might be. So I think that's something that folks can take, kind of regardless of where you served, when you served, exactly what you did. Those frameworks, those experiences, those skills exist it's on you to tease them out and see how you can displace them onto the environment that you're in right now and use them for your benefit. And also, you're not in the military anymore, so you can take the things that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do those either, right?
Yeah.
As obviously your time in the Marine Corps, company commander, running training informs a lot of this. I want to go back to your time on the Joint Staff. How far into that role that you were in towards the end did you start to compile research or be thinking about, hey, here's what I'm learning as I meet with veterans and I meet with nonprofit leaders that are trying to work in this space? Did you start compiling like research and thoughts about how you would do it kind of soon into that process, at all into that process, or is that once you applied for the role at Warriors in Quiet Waters?
Yeah, I mean, I was a student of the veteran transition and reintegration landscape the entire time that I was in that job. I didn't have a vision that I was going to be in this job then.
Sure.
But it was always studying, it was always learning about through community, talking to people. And one of the things that we did at the Joint Staff was we published thought leadership. So, whether it was around veteran employment or some other subject related to veterans, we would take all the learning that we did by, having this national footprint and all the people that we got exposed to, plus, everything that was being published at the time, and we'd publish thought leadership. So, my education started and continued through that entire 3 years that I was there. I failed to mention when I found out I was going to this office, because I didn't know it when I checked in, I actually tried to get out of it because it was not in my frame at all. I thought I was going to an operations job, and that served my vision of what I was going to do the rest of the time in the Marine Corps. And so when I came home that first day, I actually called a couple general officer mentors and asked them for their help in getting out of these orders. And every one of them, being the men they were, told me, bloom where you're planted, Brian. If you still want to go somewhere else in a year, requested a move within the Joint Staff. But, bottom line is do the best you can while you're there. So I went back on day 2, committed to the role, and it turned out that I loved it. I was the national organizations director in the chairman's office. So that meant that I had my portfolio were national level nonprofits, corporations, businesses that had a national footprint or impact. So, the other service members in the office were regional directors, so they focused on specific regions of the country. My portfolio was the nation and those that were having a national impact. So, I spent a lot of time with organizations like the Bob Woodruff Foundation, J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, organizations with a national impact in the veteran landscape. So, really got exposed to a lot in those 3 years, and that's where the vision that I brought to Warriors in Quiet Waters came from. If not for that role in the Joint Staff, I would not be here today.
Yeah, the GWAT has, obviously has had a significant impact on our way of life as a country, and our way of life in the world. I mean, so much changed on September 11th, and then so much changed day by day after.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the good things about the deployment tempo that we all went through as service members over the course of the last 20 plus years was the understanding that reintegration was going to need to be strengthened, right? Because you go back to World War II, and it was everybody served in some capacity. You either deployed and went over there and served, and then civilians were also serving right on the home front as we were trying to keep the economy going and building things. And so those guys they came back, they went to college and continued to build the economy, right? And then subsequent wars happened, and it still kind of felt like that. A couple of them were a little longer, a couple of them were a little shorter, but those conflicts, it created that sense of serve, come home, go to college, have a family, keep it going. Whereas during the GWAT, we've got people that were deploying, umpteen times. And so it makes sense that Admiral Mullen started that office and all of these things that we're learning, however, imperfectly along the way, because there's so many nonprofits in our space now that are doing great work. But then that also means there's going to be a handful that aren't. And we need to have that iterative process as we evaluate and move forward. So you mentioned that this cohort is not the same as the last cohort, which isn't the same as the previous cohort. How do you look at that iterative approach within your organization, the impact that you're trying to have on your cohorts? And the speed through which you'll make adjustments as you move forward from cohort to cohort?
Yeah, we have a very deliberate process, and we have more applicants to our program than we can serve because of our capacity limitations. So we have a very deliberate process in terms of selecting those that have the greatest need and the best fit for the program. And then we really try to form them in cohorts that will continue to serve them after the program. So we try to base them regionally, pulling a cohort together from people that live in the same region. We try to put them into cohorts where they have similar experiences in service so that they can connect with each other. And really that's the basis of the success of a cohort. And then, the the program is delivered where it's in some cases an individual experience, is sometimes a cohort wide experience. And the facilitators that I have are amazing because they're able to see these interpersonal dynamics and adjust how the program is delivered to the individual cohort itself, as well as the individuals within the cohort. And it could be one-on-one care between our facilitators and an individual veteran, or just how we're facilitating a certain cohort through the program. So we try to tailor delivery of the program the best we can to the dynamics of that individual cohort, because they're all different. We have some that are all male cohorts. We have some that are mixed gender cohorts. We have some that are all female cohorts. And every one of those is a little bit different. But I got a great team of veterans that have been trained to do this, and they're really good at recognizing those dynamics and adjusting the delivery based on the cohort itself. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it does. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing as an organization, and what are some of the challenges that you're observing nationally in the nonprofit space that you feel like are being solved here as we keep going?
Well, the fact is that ours is a high touch, logistically intensive, long-term program that requires resources to deliver, just like every other nonprofit. The biggest challenge that we face is pulling the needs of post 9/11 combat veterans out of the shadows of the American psyche. Let's be honest. Since we withdrew from Afghanistan, with less than 1% having served in the post 9/11 conflicts, it would be an easy assumption to make for most Americans that once we're out of conflict, we're not seeing it on the news anymore, that those needs don't necessarily continue to go on. But as those needs endure for decades. Just because you're out of uniform, just because the war's over, doesn't mean those needs have ended. And we're also a distracted society. I mean, we have a lot coming our way every day. Complicate that with the fact that we're in a presidential election this year. There's been questions about the economy for the last 18 months. It's been a challenging fundraising environment, primarily because veteran needs, in my belief, are not an ongoing annual philanthropic concern anymore, like they were when it was constantly on the news and in our face. So that's the biggest challenge we face. We're an organization with a big vision. We want to double our throughput for this program. I have 1,800 service members that are on my wait list for next year's program. I'm not even going to be able to serve half of that because of our capacity limitations. We got to garner more resources in order to increase our capacity through the organization. And being able to draw on people that are patriots, have an affinity for Montana and the outdoors, and want to serve veterans through this program is an ongoing challenge. But it's a challenge we're up for. We're have luckily been able to find those supporters that want to support us to get us where we're at now, and I'm very confident that we're going to continue to garner that support and achieve our organizational goals going forward. But that's the biggest challenge that we face right now.
Yeah, that rings true to me. I mean, that's what I was speaking about with those previous conflicts, right? Like the things that we've learned, especially now, like I was just with PB Abate, as I said, and some of us were talking about like those of us that go to the VFW and meet with some of these Vietnam vets, right? Like they're in their late 70s and early 80s now, mm-hmm. right? And they're talking about all the things that they didn't get across the belt that you're talking about, right? Sense of identity coming home, that sense of purpose, and that sense of community, right? Like we've done a pretty good job as a country over the years to keep our veterans not just top of mind, but integrated into our collective psyche as a country and as a culture, right? And yeah, and there's so many people that we drew down from Afghanistan, and it hit the news hard, and good, right? It should have, and lots of stories came
Mm-hmm.
out. But again, we're on the precipice of forgetting some of that stuff again. But I think the GWAT can provide a really good framing for us to move forward as a community, both within the military, combat veteran community, as well as the communities that we've reintegrated into, to say, hey, this transition that Brian and Carey are talking about, that's ongoing. It's personal for each veteran, but then it's collective within that community. But it actually needs to be collective for our entire community as a country, because if we don't acknowledge and recognize that these warriors who fought the GWAT for 20 years, we can't just forget about them. And it's not some sort of like, hey, thank you for your service and like really appreciate what you did. It's like, hey, you went through some shit, and you are going to need to continue to unpack the bad things and then utilize the good things moving forward. It's not that binary, I know, but like just, framing it that way, move forward for the rest of your life, right? Like I'm 36 years old. So, 50 years from now, when I'm 86, I'm still going to be thinking about that,
Mm-hmm.
pulling from those frameworks, pulling from those experiences. It's never going to go away, and it's not going to go away for my family. I'm really engaged in the community. So for my family, they will continue to be engaged. But I think about the hundreds of thousands, millions of people who they deployed and came home, and then it's over. Well, it's not over.
Yeah, I keep a daily reminder of that here in my office. That the prior eras. We have a member of our board. His name's Tom Stifler. He's a Marine who served in Vietnam as a radio operator. Was shot 7 times in Vietnam. Medically retired. Now serves on our board. Tom's in his 70s. A retired executive at this point. And I have a photo here in my office of Tom receiving his Purple Heart from a 1-star general in the hospital, wrapped in bandages. To this day, like I said, Tom's aged in his 70s. To this day, I get an email from Tom every day on his alive day, telling me how much that means to him. So, I keep that photo right there to remind me of what it is I'm here to do. And I think that really empowers a lot of the passion that I have about it. And the second thing I want to say about that is that there's an even bigger why. The fact is that it's not only the right thing to do, it's our duty for America, its citizens, to ensure that our veterans are able to thrive after their service. But the fact is that thriving veterans who are thriving in their communities make this country stronger, because every single one of them have been endowed with this thing called the warrior ethos. That's a really special alchemy of skills, attributes, and mindsets that they're going to be able to apply if given the opportunity in a way that can do nothing other than make this country stronger. And I believe that thriving veterans make America stronger. And the second thing is that, ours is an all volunteer force, and that's the narrative that our young people today need to see about combat veterans. They need exemplars in order to have the courage to raise their hand and serve. They need to understand that serving in the United States military is both valued and valuable, and that they're going to thrive after service. So there's a lot bigger why than just the duty to serve the veteran and their families themselves. It makes America stronger, and is directly tied to the longevity of the all volunteer force, which goes to our national security.
That's a great point, right? Like there's the why for the civilian culture, which is that support and to encourage veterans to feel valued, right? There's also that valuable piece that you talked about, which I think is really important. Obviously, if you're going to enlist or commission in the military, there's a chance that you're going to go into conflict. If you're going to go into a combat MOS, you're going to go into direct conflict, right? And there's a risk associated with that. And I do not want to minimize people's whys, right? To say like, I want to go serve, I want to go do that,
Yep.
I want to see action, I want to kind of integrate my warrior self there. But there's also the valuable piece of the foundation for a life that military service provides goes far beyond your time and experience in the military with the people to your left and right. It also is a great foundation for a life after service, right? It's a great foundation for an education, which then it reinforces your education and creates a foundation for a professional and a personal life as you contribute to the economy, not just financially and economically, but to the country and the culture as a whole. And that's a message that I try to put out there as far and wide as I can, especially when I'm speaking to younger people, right? High school kids, right? Like you can go to the military and get a really, really good foundation for a life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's special. The fact is that you come out of the military with a strong sense of duty, an incredible work ethic, a mindset that's all about never quit, despite the challenge, able to work in a team, be a great problem solver, and a whole bunch of grit. How can that not do anything but make a community, a family, an organization, a business, or government better? Um, it's just a matter of unleashing them to thrive. Every veteran has that, and it's a matter of really illuminating how they can achieve that. Because it's not an easy thing to do. Let's be honest. After spending 27 years in the Marine Corps, my identity was I was a United States Marine. I wore an eagle, globe, and anchor over my heart on my uniform every day. I had this immense sense of purpose, this immense sense of mission. I had a team built in that I would do anything for. And, for the vast 99.9% of the time, I had a leader that I respected and was excited to follow. That all disappears when you leave when you leave the military, and it's hard rebuilding that. That's a fact. That's a challenge we all face.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I want to be respectful of your time here and kind of start to wrap things up. Before I get to the open-ended question I end each episode with, where can folks find you? Where can folks find the organization? To tell us about what you have going on and where we can drive traffic.
Yeah, you can find us in Bozeman, Montana, and you can find us online at WQWF.org. You can find us on all the social media channels. If you want to see some great photographs of the peak experiences in nature that we're creating for our participants, get on our Instagram account. It's a great place to see it. In terms of what the organization's got going is we have a 5-year strategic plan that's really focused on increasing our throughput. Like I said, we want to double the throughput through the Built for More program, and then we also have a couple programs that are geared towards the family. We have a couples program and we have a caregivers program, and we're really focused on transitioning those from what are currently week-long experiences to programs like Built for More that have those types of outcomes. And we intend to launch those programs by 2027. So extending our reach beyond the individual veteran to the family and being able to serve a lot more through this highly impactful program that we've built. That's what we got going on.
I love it. Well, we'll post on LinkedIn, we'll post on Instagram, we'll tweet out and tag and collaborate and all that good stuff to get this information out there. Brian, to end each episode of the podcast, I ask an open-ended question. What's on your heart and your mind for our community right now? Could be a piece of advice, something you want to get off your chest, or something you want to reiterate that we've talked about today. But Brian, what's on your heart? What's on your mind?
I would just like to remind every active duty service member and every veteran that the opportunity to serve and lead goes well beyond the time that you hang up your uniform for the last time. And that, despite the challenges that I talked about earlier, there's a country that's ready to empower you to do that. It's not a matter of help. It's a matter of building a community similar to the one that you've had in the military that's going to thrust you forward into a life that's fulfilling and meaningful after your service. So don't be afraid to meet new people. Don't be afraid to ask for somebody to give you a hand up, because you can't do it alone. I mentioned that, the quality and the strengths of our relationships is the number one driver of thriving and longevity. That comes from a study called the Harvard Study of Adult Development that's looked at over 700 people over the course of their lifetimes. And that's what they found. So rebuild that community, and don't be afraid to lean on that community to empower you as you go forward after your exit from the military.
Well said. I mean, one thing that we don't talk enough about in terms of building that community and reintegrating is there are your veteran community, right? The people you either served directly with or have now gotten to know as you participate in the veteran community, online, and we're a very online community, which is great. But but that other piece, which is reintegrate and build community where you are in your community, in your neighborhood, in your town, in your state. There are people that were doing things that you want to be doing, that have skills and experiences while you were serving. They were doing this, whether it's a specific job or a specific industry or just community based. Reintegrate with those folks too, and really build that community across the veteran and civilian population and bridge that divide instead of just staying focused on your veteran community, or completely eschewing the veteran community and just jumping back into your local community. It's got to be integrated.
Cast a wide net, because you're going to learn something from everyone. And you'll
That's
be
right.
surprised at the generosity, respect, and camaraderie that you can find in that civilian community. It's out there.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Well said. Well, Brian, I appreciate your time, appreciate your work, appreciate your energy, and look forward to doing this again sometime.
Thanks, Carey. Me too. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Cheers. We'll see you.
See ya.